There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary, moments that act as thresholds between one existence and another. They are rarely grand or cinematic. There is no swelling orchestra, no sudden, dramatic downpour to underscore their significance. Instead, they are quiet. They are the soft click of a door latching shut, the weight of a hand on a shoulder, the intake of breath in a silent room. They are the borders you don't even realize you have crossed until you look back and see the landscape of your entire life has been irrevocably altered. For me, that threshold was the 3 inches of space between my back and Julian's on a Tuesday night in November, a space that felt as vast and as charged as the gulf between stars, a silence that contained every word we had never said to each other. He was asleep, or pretending to be, and I was doing a very poor job of pretending to be anything other than what I was, a man suspended in the amber of a single, terrifying, beautiful moment. His breathing was the only sound in the room, a slow, rhythmic tide pulling the silence in and out. It was a sound I had cataloged and committed to memory over the past 4 months, a sound that had become the metronome to my own frantic, syncopated heartbeat. In the faint city glow filtering through my blinds, I could see the shape of him under the duvet, the strong line of his shoulders, the slight curve of his spine. He had turned onto his side, facing away from me, a continent of warm, living possibility just beyond my reach. Every night for 117 nights had been a variation of this theme, a masterclass in stillness and restraint. I had learned the precise architecture of self-control, building walls within my own mind to keep from doing something as simple, as seismic, as reaching out and tracing the line of his silhouette. The air in the room was thick with the ghost of our shared history, with the comfortable weight of our friendship, and now, with this new, fragile tension that felt like a thread of spun glass. One wrong move, one exhale too loud, and it would all shatter, leaving us stranded on opposite sides of the wreckage. He smelled of my soap, a clean, anonymous scent of sandalwood and bergamot that had somehow become entirely his. It clung to his skin, to the collar of the old t-shirt he'd borrowed, to the pillow his head rested on. My apartment, once a space that was solely my own, a quiet sanctuary filled with the scent of darkroom chemicals and brewing coffee, had slowly, almost imperceptibly, become a shared territory. His running shoes were by the door, a testament to his frantic energy. His laptop was a silver slab on my coffee table, a portal to the demanding corporate world he navigated with a confidence I could only ever marvel at. A half-empty mug of tea, the kind he only drank when he was stressed, sat on the nightstand. These were the artifacts of his presence, the quiet colonization of my life, an invasion I had not only permitted but had secretly, desperately craved for years. And now, here he was, occupying the most sacred space of all, the other half of my bed, a proximity that was both a profound comfort and an exquisite form of torture. I lay there, a cartographer of inches, mapping the terrain of our silence, wondering if he felt it too, this invisible, powerful current pulling us together in the dark. Before all this, before the nights of shared beds and unspoken questions, there was just us. There was Leo and Julian, a pairing that made sense to no one but ourselves. We met in the sterile, overlit environment of a college lecture hall. In a class called Introduction to Photographic Principles, I was there because it was my major, my entire world compressed into f-stops and shutter speeds, a way of seeing the world through a lens that felt safer than using my own eyes. He was there, as he later confessed, because he'd heard it was an easy A and a welcome break from the relentless spreadsheets and market analyses of his business degree. He was all bright, confident energy, the kind of person who seemed to take up more space in a room just by existing. He would stride in late, smelling of coffee and ambition, his smile a casual, disarming thing he deployed with devastating effect. I was his opposite in every conceivable way. Quiet, perpetually hunched over a light table, more comfortable in the solitary red gloom of the darkroom than in any social gathering. I observed life. He lived it, loudly and without apology. Our friendship shouldn't have worked. It was an anomaly, a glitch in the social matrix of university life. It began with him asking to borrow my notes, his handwriting a chaotic, forward-slanting scrawl that mirrored his personality. It deepened over a shared project where my technical skill and his bold, conceptual ideas somehow merged into something cohesive, something that earned us that easy A he was after. We discovered a shared, absurd sense of humor, a love for terrible science fiction movies, and a mutual appreciation for the specific kind of pizza that could only be found at a 24-hour place 2 towns over. Our late-night study sessions became less about studying and more about talking, about everything and nothing. He would talk about his future, a gleaming, well-planned skyscraper of a life with clear floors for career, marriage, and success. I would talk about light, about capturing the soul of a place or a person in a single frame, a much more nebulous and uncertain path. He never made me feel like my dreams were less valid than his. He listened with a genuine curiosity that was, at the time, a balm to my insecure, artistic soul. He saw me, I think, in a way that few people ever had. I can pinpoint the exact moment my feelings for him shifted, the subtle tectonic plate movement in my heart that reconfigured everything. It was junior year, finals week. We were holed up in the library, fueled by vending machine coffee and a shared sense of dread. He had fallen asleep, his head slumped against a stack of economics textbooks, his face softened in the harsh fluorescent light. His usual confident mask had slipped away, revealing something younger, more vulnerable underneath. A stray lock of dark hair had fallen across his forehead, and without thinking, with an impulse that came from a place deeper than friendship, I reached out and gently brushed it back. My fingers grazed his temple, the skin warm and soft. It was a fleeting touch, lasting no more than a second, but it sent a jolt through me, a current of shocking, undeniable tenderness. He didn't stir, but in that moment, the room fell away. It was just the two of us, suspended in the quiet hum of the library, and a truth I had been subconsciously avoiding bloomed in my chest with painful, terrifying clarity. I was in love with my best friend. Of course, I said nothing. I packed that feeling away, stored it in a locked room deep inside myself, a room whose existence I would deny to everyone, especially him. He was Julian, my straight best friend. It was a fact as solid and unchangeable as the laws of physics. He started dating Sarah a few months later, a bright, kind political science major who fit perfectly into the blueprint of his skyscraper life. I liked her genuinely. I had to. Hating her would have been a confession, a crack in the facade of platonic camaraderie I had so carefully constructed. So I became the supportive friend, the easygoing third wheel, the photographer who took their engagement photos 2 years later, my heart a dull, steady ache behind the lens. I watched him build his life, laying each brick with precision, and I learned to live in the room I had built for my feelings, decorating its walls with resignation and a quiet, enduring affection that I convinced myself was enough. Friendship, I told myself, was a precious thing, a durable structure. It was better to be a permanent fixture in his life, even in the shadows, than to risk demolishing the whole thing for a love that could never be. For years, this architecture held. I was safe inside my carefully guarded heart, and he was happy. And for years, that was enough. The night the foundations of his world cracked, the storm that had been brewing on his horizon finally broke over my doorstep. It was a Tuesday in July, rain lashing against my apartment windows in a furious, relentless rhythm. I was editing a shoot, lost in the meticulous process of adjusting shadows and highlights, when the intercom buzzed with a ferocity that made me jump. I wasn't expecting anyone. It was almost midnight. I pressed the talk button, my voice hesitant. "Hello." A crackle of static, and then a voice, hollowed out and broken, a voice I almost didn't recognize as his. "Leo, it's me. Can I come up?" I didn't need to ask why. The raw, unvarnished pain in his voice was a language I understood immediately. I buzzed him in, my own heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. When I opened the apartment door, he was standing there, looking like a shipwreck. His hair was plastered to his forehead, his suit soaked through, his face pale and drawn. He wasn't holding an umbrella. He was just standing there, dripping onto my welcome mat, his eyes wide and lost, like a child who had forgotten the way home. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me, and in that look, I saw the complete and utter devastation of a man whose carefully planned life had just been dynamited. He finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "She's gone, Leo. She packed her things. She just left." I pulled him inside, closing the door on the storm that seemed to have followed him into the hallway. I didn't know what to do, what to say. The usual platitudes felt like insults in the face of such colossal grief. So I did the only thing I could think of. I got him a towel, made him a cup of tea he didn't drink, and sat with him in the quiet of my living room as he stared at the wall, the story of the end of his world tumbling out of him in disjointed, painful fragments. He talked for hours, circling the same points of disbelief and hurt. I just listened, providing a silent, steady presence, a lighthouse in his personal hurricane. When the sun began to hint at its arrival, painting the edges of my blinds in a soft, apologetic gray, his words finally ran out. He looked utterly exhausted, hollowed out by grief. I can't go back to the apartment," he said, his voice rough. "It's too quiet. Everything is hers." "Or was stay here," I said, the words leaving my mouth without hesitation. "Take the couch. Stay as long as you need." He looked at me, his eyes shimmering with a gratitude so profound it made my own throat ache. He nodded, a small, jerky movement. And so it began, not with a conscious decision, but with a crisis. He fell into a deep, troubled sleep on my sofa, wrapped in a quilt my grandmother had made, and my role in his life began to quietly, seismically, shift. I was no longer just the friend. I was the harbor, the safe port in the storm. It was a role I accepted without question, ignoring the quiet, hopeful, treacherous voice in my head that whispered this might be the beginning of something more, something that would ultimately destroy me. The door to a new, more complicated chapter of our lives had been thrown open by the force of his pain, and all I could do was stand on the threshold, watching him sleep, and brace myself for what was to come. The first few weeks were a blur of careful navigation. Julian existed in a fog of grief, moving through my apartment like a ghost, his usual vibrant energy replaced by a heavy, listless silence. He would go to work, putting on the mask of the competent, successful consultant, and then return to my place in the evening, the mask crumbling the moment the door closed behind him. He would sink onto the couch, stare at the television without seeing it, and I would make dinner, our evenings falling into a new, somber routine. We didn't talk much about Sarah, not after that first night. Her name was a raw nerve, and we both instinctively avoided it. Instead, we existed in a shared quiet, a space where my presence was simply meant to be a buffer against the crushing loneliness of his new reality. He slept on the couch every night, refusing my offers of the bed, insisting he didn't want to put me out. It was a physical boundary that mirrored the emotional one we were both so careful to maintain. He was the guest, the friend in need. I was the host, the steadfast supporter. The lines were clear. But grief is a strange and powerful solvent. It dissolves boundaries, erodes carefully constructed walls, and seeks out warmth and comfort in ways that defy logic or convention. The shift was gradual, a slow, creeping tide. It started with him falling asleep on the couch while we were watching a movie, his head eventually slumping against my shoulder. The first time it happened, my entire body went rigid. I sat there for 2 hours, my arm numb, my neck cramping, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, just so he could have that small measure of peace. I studied the relaxed lines of his face, the way his eyelashes rested against his cheek, and felt that old, familiar ache in my chest, sharper and more potent than ever before. He was so close, so unguarded. It felt like a betrayal to want him in this state, to have my own selfish desires stirring while he was so broken. But the wanting was there, a stubborn, undeniable hum beneath the surface of my sympathy. Then came the nightmares. He'd wake up with a muffled cry, sitting bolt upright on the couch, his heart pounding, his face slick with sweat. I would come out of my room, drawn by the sound, and find him trembling, lost in the vestiges of a bad dream. I'd make him some warm milk, an old remedy my mother swore by, and sit with him until his breathing evened out, until the ghosts receded back into the shadows. After one particularly bad night, he looked at me, his eyes pleading, his voice small. "I hate sleeping alone," he confessed, the words raw and unadorned. "The silence, it's too loud. It just makes me think." My heart fractured a little for him. I knew that silence. I had lived in it for years. "My bed's a queen," I heard myself say, the words feeling reckless and dangerous. "It's big enough for two. If you think it would help," I rushed to add a disclaimer, a shield for my own vulnerability. "No weird stuff. Just so you're not alone, a joke." It was always a joke, a layer of plausible deniability we wrapped around any gesture that strayed too close to the edge of our platonic definition. He managed a weak, grateful smile. "No weird stuff, Leo. Promise." That night marked the true beginning of the ritual. The couch was abandoned. He started sleeping in my bed, a vast, uncharted territory of intimacy I was entirely unprepared for. The first few nights were stiff and awkward. We lay on opposite edges of the mattress, a demilitarized zone of duvet between us, two soldiers pretending the other wasn't there. We were hyper-aware of every rustle of the sheets, every sigh, every shift in weight. But slowly, night by night, the distance began to shrink. Sleep, like grief, is a great leveler of defenses. One morning I woke up to find his arm thrown casually across my chest, his face buried in my shoulder. I lay perfectly still, my breath caught in my throat, memorizing the weight of him, the warmth seeping through my t-shirt, the scent of his hair so close to my face. It was the most profound peace and the most intense panic I had ever experienced simultaneously. He shifted in his sleep and pulled away, and the loss of contact was a physical ache. This became our new normal, an unspoken arrangement built on the pretext of his comfort. The jokes became more frequent, a way to diffuse the mounting tension. "We're like an old married couple," he'd say with a chuckle as I handed him his morning coffee. "Just need to get a dog and a mortgage." I would laugh along, a hollow sound in my own ears, because for me, it wasn't a joke. It was a glimpse into a life I desperately wanted, a life that felt so close I could almost taste it, yet was separated from me by the thinnest, most impenetrable wall of his presumed heterosexuality. Every night was a study in contrasts. He would fall asleep almost instantly, exhausted from the emotional toll of his days, his body seeking out my warmth with an unconscious, animal instinct. He would drape a leg over mine, or press his back against me, finding an anchor in my presence. And I would lie awake for hours, my mind racing, analyzing every single point of contact, every subtle shift, cataloging the data of our proximity and trying, desperately, to find a pattern, a meaning, a sign that this was more than just a man clinging to a life raft. The ritual extended beyond the bedroom. Our lives became more and more entangled. I did his laundry with mine. He started leaving a change of clothes, then a drawer's worth. We'd cook together, falling into an easy rhythm in my small kitchen, our shoulders brushing as we reached for spices or pans. He started calling my apartment home, without thinking, a slip of the tongue that would hang in the air for a moment before he'd correct himself with a self-conscious laugh. He was healing, I could see it. The deep-set sadness in his eyes was slowly receding, replaced by flashes of the old Julian, the one who laughed from his gut and filled a room with his presence. And as he healed, I thought the need for our arrangement would fade. I braced myself every evening for him to say he was ready to go back to his own apartment, that he was okay now. I dreaded it, and I knew it was necessary. But he never said it. The ritual continued, night after night. He kept choosing to stay. The pretext of his grief was wearing thin, becoming translucent, and I could almost see the shape of something else forming underneath it, something that looked terrifyingly like hope. I didn't dare name it. I just lived within the fragile ecosystem of our unspoken thing, watering it with my silence and my patience, praying it wouldn't wither, praying it wouldn't kill me. The crossing didn't happen on a night of high drama. It arrived on the back of a quiet, ordinary Wednesday. A storm had been threatening all day, the sky a bruised, moody purple, and the air was thick with a heavy, electric stillness that seemed to have seeped into the apartment itself. Julian had come home from work late, looking worn down to the bone. A big project he was leading had hit a snag, and he'd spent the day in tense, fruitless meetings. He barely spoke during dinner, his mind clearly elsewhere, his brow furrowed in a way that made me want to smooth out the lines with my thumb. After we ate, he didn't even suggest a movie. He just sighed, a deep, weary sound, and said he was going to turn in early. Long day, he murmured, running a hand through his already messy hair. My brain feels like scrambled eggs. I get it, I said softly. Get some rest. He gave me a small, tired smile and disappeared into the bedroom. I stayed in the living room for a while, cleaning up the kitchen, the clink of plates and running water a stark contrast to the charged silence of the apartment. The first fat drops of rain began to hit the window pane, and soon it was a full-blown deluge, the wind howling around the corners of the building. It felt like the world outside was finally mirroring the tempest that had been raging inside me for months. I finished my tasks, turned off the lights, and made my way to the bedroom. The door was ajar, as it always was, a silent invitation. He was already in bed, lying on his side, his back to my half. I slipped in as quietly as I could, settling into my usual spot, maintaining the familiar, respectful distance. But tonight, the distance felt different. It wasn't comfortable or routine. It was a chasm, humming with unspoken energy. The sound of the rain was a constant roar, isolating us from the rest of the world, cocooning us in the small, warm space of the bedroom. I lay on my back, staring up at the ceiling, listening to the storm and the sound of his breathing, which seemed less settled than usual. We lay like that for what felt like an eternity, two bodies in the dark, separated by a universe of unspoken feelings. I was just on the verge of drifting into a fitful sleep when he moved. It wasn't a sleepy, unconscious shift. It was deliberate. He rolled over to face me. I could feel his eyes on me in the darkness. My own heart began a frantic, panic drumming against my ribs. I kept my own eyes closed, feigning sleep, a coward to the last. This was it. He was going to say it. He was going to say he was better now, that he was grateful, that it was time for him to go home. I braced myself for the gentle, friendly severing I had been dreading for months. But he didn't speak. The silence stretched, pulled taut between us. And then his voice, when it came, was so quiet I almost thought I'd imagined it, a soft murmur beneath the roar of the rain. Leo. I forced myself to breathe, to open my eyes. In the dim light, I could just make out the shape of his face, his expression unreadable. Yeah. My own voice was a croak. He was quiet for another long moment, and I could feel the monumental effort it was taking him to form his next words. He was on a precipice of his own. Would it be okay? He began, his voice barely audible, laced with a vulnerability I had never heard from him before. He swallowed, and I saw the slight bob of his Adam's apple. Would it be okay if I kissed you? The world stopped. The rain, the wind, the city, my own frantic pulse. It all just ceased to exist. There was only his question, hanging in the air between us, a fragile, impossible bridge. It wasn't a joke. There was no trace of irony in his tone, no escape hatch of plausible deniability. It was just a question, a real, terrifying, beautiful question, and it demanded a real answer. All the walls I had built, all the years of careful self-preservation, all the resignation I had cloaked myself in, it all crumbled to dust in the face of those 10 simple words. This was the threshold. This was the moment I had replayed in my dreams 1,000 times, and now that it was here, I was paralyzed by the sheer, blinding reality of it. I couldn't find my voice. I couldn't form a word. So I did the only thing I could. I gave the answer I had been holding inside me for nearly a decade. I nodded. A small, almost imperceptible movement in the dark. But he saw it. He moved slowly, tentatively, giving me every opportunity to pull away, to stop him. He raised a hand, his fingers cool and slightly trembling as they cupped my jaw. his thumb stroking softly against my cheek. And then he leaned in and pressed his lips to mine. It was nothing like I had imagined. It wasn't a firework display or a cinematic swell of emotion. It was quiet. It was hesitant and soft, a question in itself. It was the taste of rain and salt and a deep, aching loneliness I recognized as a mirror of my own. It was a confession. It was an apology. It was a beginning. I brought my own hand up to rest on his chest, feeling the frantic, wild beating of his heart beneath my palm, a rhythm that finally matched my own. And I kissed him back, pouring every unspoken word, every ounce of my long-held, secret love into that single, gentle press of our mouths. The storm raged on outside, but in the quiet of my room, in the space between one breath and the next, the world had finally, irrevocably, beautifully, fallen into place. The morning after was a study in silence, but it was a new kind of silence, sharp and brittle, laced with the panic of consequence. I woke first, just as the gray dawn was filtering into the room. Julian was still asleep, but he had moved away from me in the night, retreating to his side of the bed. The warmth of his body was gone, and the space between us felt cold and accusatory. The kiss, which had felt so real, so right in the dreamlike intimacy of the stormy night, now seemed like a reckless, fragile thing under the harsh light of day. I slipped out of bed, my movements careful and quiet, and went to the kitchen to make coffee, the familiar ritual a flimsy anchor in a sea of uncertainty. I could hear him stir, the rustle of sheets, a sound that now made my stomach clench with anxiety. He emerged from the bedroom a few minutes later, not meeting my eyes. He was already dressed in the clothes he'd worn the day before, his hair still messy from sleep. The easy domesticity of our mornings, the shared coffee and comfortable chatter, was gone, replaced by a tense, formal politeness. "Hey," he said, his voice strained as he grabbed his keys from the bowl by the door. "I've got to run. Early meeting I forgot about. It was a lie, and we both knew it." His calendar was a shared document on his laptop, a habit from his life with Sarah he'd never broken. I knew he had nothing scheduled until 10, but I didn't call him on it. I just stood there, my hand wrapped around a cooling mug of coffee, and nodded. "Okay," I said, my own voice sounding hollow. "Drive safe." He was already at the door, his back to me. "Yeah, I'll text you." And then he was gone, the click of the door latch echoing in the silent apartment with a dreadful finality. He left behind a half-empty drawer, a toothbrush in my bathroom, and the ghost of a kiss that I was beginning to fear I had hallucinated. The scent of him lingered on the pillows, a cruel reminder of a closeness that had vanished with the morning light. I spent the day in a state of suspended animation, my phone a lead weight in my pocket. I replayed the kiss over and over in my mind, dissecting it, analyzing it, searching for any sign that I had misread the entire situation. Had it just been a moment of grief-fueled confusion for him? A desperate grasp for comfort that had crossed a line he now deeply regretted? The fear that I had not just imagined his feelings, but had somehow taken advantage of his vulnerability, began to curdle in my stomach. I had ruined it. I had ruined everything. Our friendship, that precious, durable thing I had guarded for so long, was now a casualty of one stupid, hopeful nod in the dark. He did text, but it was hours later, a brief, sterile message. "Hey, meeting ran super long. Swamped today? We'll probably just crash at my place tonight to get an early start tomorrow." There was no warmth, no talk later. No sign of the man who had asked to kiss me just hours before. It was a clear, unambiguous retreat. He was putting distance between us, rebuilding the walls that had so beautifully, so briefly, come down. The days that followed were a quiet, agonizing hell. A week of stilted texts, of missed calls he returned with an excuse, of a growing, cavernous silence between us. My apartment felt huge and empty without him. The silence he had once hated, now my own personal torment. Every corner held a memory of him, every object a reminder of the life we had temporarily shared. The hope that had bloomed so brightly in my chest withered and died, leaving behind a bitter, aching void. I was grieving the loss of a relationship that had never even truly begun, and the loss of a friendship that I was sure was now over forever. By the end of the week, I couldn't take it anymore. The not knowing was worse than any confirmation of his regret. I needed to hear it from him, to face the wreckage head-on, so I could at least begin the painful process of sweeping it up. I drove to his apartment, the one he had shared with Sarah, the one he hadn't been able to face for months. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I had no idea what I was going to say. I just knew that I couldn't live in this limbo any longer. I stood outside his door for a full 5 minutes, my heart hammering, before I finally found the courage to knock. The door opened, and he was there, looking even worse than I felt. He was unshaven, with dark circles under his eyes, and he was wearing the same wrinkled shirt he'd had on 3 days ago. His apartment was a mess, boxes half-packed and then abandoned, a testament to a life in disarray. He looked surprised to see me, and then a wave of something else, guilt, fear, sadness, washed over his face. "Leo," he said, his voice rough. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk, Julian," I said, my own voice steadier than I expected. I pushed past my fear, fueled by a week of agony. You can't do what you did and then disappear. You owe me more than that. Our friendship deserves more than that." He flinched at the word friendship, as if it were a physical blow. He didn't invite me in. He just stood in the doorway, blocking my path, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "I know," he whispered, his eyes fixed on the floor. "I'm sorry. I'm such a coward. I don't care if you're a coward," I said, the frustration and hurt of the past week finally bubbling to the surface. "I just want to understand. Was it a mistake? Was it just a weird moment? Just tell me the truth, Julian. Whatever it is, I can take it. But the silence is killing me." He finally looked at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. The carefully constructed facade of the confident, in-control man he presented to the world was completely gone. In its place was someone I had never seen before, someone utterly lost and terrified. "It wasn't a mistake," he said, his voice cracking. That's what's messing me up. "It wasn't a mistake, Leo. It was the only thing that's felt real in years." He choked on a sob, running a hand desperately through his hair. "And it scares the hell out of me." He finally stepped back, away from the door, a silent admission of defeat, an invitation into the chaos of his life and his heart. I stepped across the threshold, and the door swung shut behind me, enclosing us in the mess he had made. A mess I was finally beginning to understand was not just about the end of one relationship, but the terrifying, unexpected beginning of another. The confession, when it came, was not a flood, but a slow, painful trickle. He sank onto a dusty armchair, the only piece of furniture that didn't seem to be in a state of transit, and I sat on the edge of a packing box, the space between us filled with the debris of his old life. He started talking, his gaze distant, as if he were narrating a story about someone else. He talked about his relationship with Sarah, about how he had loved her, or thought he had, but how it had always felt like he was following a script, playing a role that was expected of him. The successful young professional with the perfect, pretty girlfriend, soon-to-be fiancée, soon-to-be wife. He had been building the skyscraper of his life exactly according to the blueprints he'd drawn up in college, but he'd never stopped to ask himself if he actually wanted to live in it. When she left, he said, his voice low and raspy, it wasn't just that I was heartbroken. I was relieved. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. A part of me was glad it was over, glad I didn't have to keep pretending to be this person who had everything figured out. He finally looked at me, his eyes searching my face for understanding. "And then, there was you. You were just there. You didn't ask questions, you didn't push. You just made space for me. In your home, in your life. And it was quiet. And it was safe." He paused, struggling to articulate the tangled knot of his feelings. "Sleeping next to you. At first it was just about not being alone. But then it wasn't. Lying there in the dark, just listening to you breathe. It was the only time my own head would go quiet. All the noise, all the panic about my life falling apart, it would just stop. And the feeling I had, it wasn't just gratitude, Leo. It was more than that. It was this deep, quiet peace. Something I've never felt with anyone before. Not even with her." He took a shaky breath. "That night, with the storm, I lay there thinking about how I didn't want it to end, how I didn't want to go back to my own life. I wanted to stay in that quiet, safe place with you. And I realized that the safe place wasn't your apartment. It was just you. His voice dropped to a whisper. Kissing you, it felt like coming home. And the second I felt that, I panicked. Because what does that mean? What does it make me? My entire life, I've been one thing. And suddenly, maybe I'm not. And if I'm not that, then I don't know who I am at all. I listened, my own anger and hurt dissolving with every word he spoke, replaced by a profound, aching empathy. He wasn't rejecting me. He was rejecting a fundamental shift in his own identity, a seismic event that threatened to bring the rest of his carefully constructed world crashing down. His flight wasn't about me. It was about his own fear. He was terrified of the truth the kiss had revealed, a truth he wasn't ready to face. I moved from my packing box and knelt on the floor in front of him, closing the distance between us. I took his hands in mine. They were cold and trembling. "Julian," I said softly, forcing him to meet my eyes. "Look at me. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to have a label or a blueprint. You think I've had this all figured out? I've been in love with you for 10 years. For 10 years, I've been living in this quiet little room inside myself, convinced that it was impossible, that you were a language I would never be able to speak. I know what it's like to be scared of the truth." His eyes widened, the full weight of my own confession finally landing. 10 years, he breathed, his voice filled with a dawning, sorrowful wonder. Since that night in the library during finals week, I confirmed, a small, sad smile on my face. It doesn't matter. What matters is now. What matters is that you're not alone in this. I'm scared too. I'm terrified of what this means, of where it goes. But I'm more scared of losing you. I was more scared of that silence this past week than I am of any of this. I squeezed his hands. We don't have to define it. We don't have to name it. We just have to not run away from it. Can we do that? Can we just be and figure the rest out together? A single tear traced a path through the stubble on his cheek, then another. He nodded, a jerky, desperate motion. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against mine, and for the first time, it wasn't him seeking a temporary harbor in a storm, and it wasn't me providing a silent, one-sided comfort. It was two people, equally lost, equally scared, and equally hopeful, finally finding their anchor in each other. He didn't have to be the unknowing initiator anymore, and I didn't have to be the quiet observer. We could just be Leo and Julian. And for the first time, that felt like more than enough. It felt like everything. The rebuilding process was slow and deliberate, like the development of a photograph in a darkroom tray. There was no sudden, magical fix. We didn't fall into an easy, conventional relationship overnight. Instead, we started with honesty, creating a new foundation out of the rubble of his old life and my old silence. He stayed at his apartment for a few more weeks, a necessary step for him to dismantle his past on his own terms. He packed up Sarah's things with a sense of quiet closure, not frantic grief. He cleaned and sorted and made the space his own again, but it was different this time. We talked every day, on the phone, over text, the communication lines that had been so fraught with anxiety, now open and clear. We talked about his fears, my years of hidden feelings, our hopes for what we could be. We were tentative, careful with each other's hearts, learning a new language of vulnerability together. He came over for dinner one night, a few weeks after our conversation. There was a new lightness to him, a sense of a burden having been lifted. After we ate, we sat on the couch, a familiar scene with an entirely new energy. There was no pretext, no unspoken tension. He reached for my hand, his fingers lacing through mine, a simple, declarative gesture that spoke volumes. It wasn't a sleepy, unconscious act. It was a choice. We sat like that for a long time, watching a movie we weren't really paying attention to, the comfortable silence between us now filled not with yearning or uncertainty, but with a quiet, solid contentment. When it was late, he stood up, and for a heart-stopping second, I thought he was going to leave. But he just smiled, a soft, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I'm tired," he said. "I think I'm going to go to bed." He didn't ask if he could stay. He didn't make a joke. He just walked to the bedroom, my bedroom, our bedroom, and I followed a few minutes later. We got into bed, and he turned to face me, pulling me close until my head was resting on his chest. I could hear the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart, a sound that was no longer a source of frantic analysis, but a deep, resonant comfort. He kissed the top of my head. "Good night, Leo," he whispered. "Good night, Julian." I whispered back into the fabric of his shirt, and we slept. It was a simple, profound act. There was no ritual, no ambiguity. It was just two people choosing to be together, to find rest and safety in each other's arms. The door to the bedroom was closed, not to shut the world out, but because we were both finally on the same side of it. Slowly, his life began to merge with mine again, but this time it was intentional. His things migrated back to my apartment, not as the temporary artifacts of a refugee, but as the possessions of a resident. His favorite coffee mug found a permanent home in my cupboard. His running shoes settled by the door as if they belonged there. His laptop on the coffee table was no longer a symbol of his stressful other life, but just a part of our shared domestic landscape. We learned the small, intimate details of a shared life. We learned that I couldn't sleep if the closet door was open and that he always stole the covers. We learned that he liked his toast burnt and that I hummed when I was concentrating on editing photos. These were the tiny, beautiful bricks with which we were building our new home, a structure not made of glass and steel like his old skyscraper, but of something far more durable: quiet understanding, gentle affection, and a hard one: mutual honesty. We never did put a label on it, not for a long time. We didn't need one. The outside world, with its demands for definitions and categories, could wait. In the sanctuary of our apartment, we were simply us. We were the comfortable silence of a shared breakfast, the warmth of a hand on the small of a back in a crowded room, the easy laughter over a burnt dinner. We were two people who had found their way to each other through a storm, and who were now learning to navigate the calm, sunlit waters on the other side. My camera, which had for so long been a shield, a way to observe life from a safe distance, now felt like an extension of my joy. I took pictures of him, not as the charismatic, untouchable friend, but as the man I loved, asleep in our bed with the morning light on his face, laughing in the kitchen with flour on his cheek, reading on the sofa with his feet in my lap. I was no longer just capturing light. I was capturing our life. Some doors, once you walk through them, change you forever. You can't go back to the person you were in the room before. The threshold we crossed that stormy November night wasn't just about a kiss. It was about letting go of the lives we thought we were supposed to live and embracing the one that was waiting for us, the one that had been quietly growing in the spaces between our jokes and our shared silences all along. It was about the profound discovery that home isn't a place with four walls and a roof. It's a feeling. It's the quiet certainty of knowing that there is a person in the world who sees you, who accepts you, who will lie awake with you in the dark, not out of necessity, but out of choice. It is the peace of finding your anchor in the steady rhythm of another's heart. We had spent so long navigating the treacherous currents of the unspoken, and now we had finally found our harbor. We began to heal and to build in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned, at long last, to create together.